with nearshoring, and what do you expect to see? What has changed besides all the things that are going on in the world? Why is this relevant now?
Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everyone. So let's talk about nearshoring and what it is. I'm sure the term nearshoring a couple of perhaps years ago meant nothing to us. It would have meant absolutely nothing as to what nearshoring meant. But let me raise some specific issues as to why nearshoring is important. And by now, I'm sure everyone at least has a basic understanding of what nearshoring means. Let me emphasize that there are some severe geopolitical changes, the disruption in the China-US relationship being one of them. If you look at, for example, at what COVID-19 did to supply chain, and examples like the Suez Canal disaster, you might remember this accident, the Suez Canal, that lasted for a few weeks, but the aftermath of that disaster lasted for about 2 years. So suddenly companies and countries realized that they were under severe risk of having this analysis that was the previous economic standard of saying, source your materials wherever in the world, as long as you can save a penny. So if you could save a penny and do this in a far region in the world, even with transportation considered, it was worth the effort. And that was basically how companies reacted to saying, it doesn't matter if we have the supply chain in a politically shady country like China, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, we have a better supply, economics. But suddenly the COVID-19 and these geopolitical changes and Suez and other matters said, oops, we have a problem. There are certain things that we cannot control, and suddenly the savings can be quickly eroded and in fact eliminated because we didn't account for those risks. So the mindset has changed dramatically. Now the mindset is differently. It's watch out for political risk, watch out for freight cost and insurance costs, and make sure that you have the suppliers as close as possible to where you are. And also, you must have redundancy. You cannot depend on one single supplier for companies and industries that depend on very timely delivery. One such example, as you know, for example, the automotive industry has what we refer to as just-in-time delivery. Just-in-time means there's no inventory. You need to supply at the exact time in the manufacturing line where the wheels, the battery, or whatever is needed. If you miss that, you will be severely penalized, but you will stop the production line. So that's why this is so important for companies. Nearshoring means eliminating those risks and having the best possible scenario. So if you look at the world map and you say, okay, why is Mexico so prominent? Well, it's a matter of geography. It's a matter of saying, where is the most important market in the world? The most competitive region in the world happens to be North America. The US is the largest, consumer of a number of products, including, again, automotive, mobility, aerospace, etc. And we happen to be their next door neighbors. So that may be fairly obvious, but it wasn't so obvious a few years ago when, in fact, and some of you may remember this, where companies were actually saying, well, Mexico's okay, but I'll shift my production over to China. We saw some clients that said, Mexico is closed, but we'll save money and move to China. I saw that, in fact, with a couple of clients. That is now happening in the reverse direction. Now, that may sound like a wonderful news, and in fact it is, but let's see what happens in the real world and what are we seeing in terms of hard data. Next slide, please. So here's a list of some of the investments that we know have been recognized in the last year or so that are basically saying Mexico is a right place to invest. Some, and that's something that I will leave with you, it may be controversial to determine whether this list is nearshoring based. And I have my questions myself. I think some of this actually refer to historic decisions that were already underway. The fact that we have obviously USMCA is a big help in terms of seeing Mexico as a good place for manufacturing in terms of benefiting from the North American market. But again, there are people that dispute that this, in fact, is all nearshoring driven. Let me show you next slide. So if you look, la siguiente lámina, por favor. Well, we'll get there. There we go. So this matters again because from the automotive and other industries, having that direct supply in Mexico is so important. I have a client, for example, that said, I manufacture this type of components for cars, for trucks. There's one client, for example, that manufactures engines or parts for trains. So they realize that a train is a big thing. Moving a train from China to Mexico and then to the US made no sense. So let's manufacture in Mexico. Let's manufacture the chassis in Mexico. Let's manufacture the batteries in Mexico. So a lot of companies going through this specific mindset, and it's paying out. It's actually seeing some of these companies saying, this is the place to be. Now, next slide, please. So let me tell you why this location is so important for this company. So there's a host of issues. I will not go through them. You can sort of check the main reasons as to why Mexico is attractive. We have a free trade network that is second to none. We have bilateral investment treaties that are important. We have, evidently, again, I said the geographic proximity. We have the experience. Mexico is no longer simply a place of cheap labor. In fact, if you look at the records of automotive and aerospace companies, and you look at the quality standards, Mexico continuously ranks as #1 in quality in very sophisticated products. Talk about, again, not cheap, but expensive cars, or even, again, some of these helicopters or airplanes or whatever. So we rank up there. It's not only cheap labor, it's the fact that we have skilled labor, a track record of quality products, and successful operations. But we get to the next slide, please, which tells us where are the risks and where are we looking at the real challenges. And I call this the elephant in the room. So let's sit down and understand where we are. So Mexico has a historic opportunity. According to many opinion leaders, this may be an opportunity that is similar to the circumstances in the late 40s, early 50s, after World War II, where there was the Mexican economic miracle, where Mexico grew at 6-7% per year during 30 years. You know, that would be nice to have today. It was that size of the opportunity to have Mexico growing at such speed. Many say this is yet a second opportunity as the one we had after World War II because of everything that is happening. If we were not in a place where we had to select, where Mexico is, and you said, pick a place where you would put your country, we would select where we are right now because of all the circumstances. But we have these issues to come into play. One, the key decisions on how to really capture the full power of nearshoring are not being made. So we have electricity. In 2019, we were able, through the bidding process, to secure the lowest production cost of electricity in the world, not in Mexico, in the world. We hit the lowest production cost in the entire world. Those bids were suspended. We have today several kilowatts of solar and wind farms ready to engage in the distribution grid. They're not being connected. Why? Because we want to burn fuel oil, because we want to burn carbon, coal, etc. So the lack of energy and the lack of reliable energy resources is hitting these projects where it hurts the most, which is I cannot put a factory in Mexico that does not have a clean energy supply. And that's not theory. We have clients wishing to sign, wishing to install. They cannot do so right now because the electricity is not there. Second, we have safety concerns. This is no longer a matter of saying, well, there's an isolated issue in Tijuana or some problems in Chiapa de Corzo or wherever. No, this is now an item that goes into the business plans. You can see the business plans and they say 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% of the budget goes to security. It's a big chunk of the cost. So it's no longer just a matter of newspaper gossip. It's a matter of companies being hurt by our country's inability to provide safety in a meaningful manner. The other thing is logistics. And there's a fourth one that I'll refer to in a second. Logistics. So imagine you get supplies from Asia in Lázaro Cárdenas, and you find out that the railroad has been blocked for 3 weeks. So you cannot move the merchandise from Lázaro Cárdenas, and you cannot do so by truck or etc. So suddenly the calculations of how that will affect your production supply becomes a nightmare. Or you have highways that are being stopped because somebody wants to rob something, or trains. You derail a train because you want to get something out of that train. Again, it hurts to talk about these issues, but they're the reality, and we need to push the government to make the right decisions. I have bad news and good news. The bad news is I don't see that happening in the next 11 months. The good news is there's a new government coming next year. So unless somebody is completely out of their mind, we have to fix these things. The fourth item that it did not include there is labor. We're now facing a shortage of labor. Imagine, we don't have enough employment of employees available for skilled labor, but we happen to have a huge influx of immigrants, and we're not using the immigrants for that paid work. So instead of looking at immigrants as a source of good supply of new employment offer, we're not using them. Instead, we're putting them in jail. We built a wall in the southern part of our border. So bad decisions, bad results, but we can fix it. And I'll talk about that in my next time on the phone.
Juan Francisco, thank you. That's a very, very comprehensive analysis. And one of the many good points you raised was talking about NAFTA and how things have changed. So I want to ask you, Luis, you were one of the people who negotiated on behalf of the Mexican government in NAFTA. The USMCA, so what replaced NAFTA, one, is that working, and how is that affecting nearshoring? And is there a problem, including some of the problems that Juan Francisco raised? Is there a problem with execution, either from the U.S. side or from the Mexican side, that might interfere with nearshoring possibilities?
Sure. Let me give you just a little bit of context, and these are not my words. I heard the other day Luis de la Calle saying that in Mexico there are 4 Mexico times, or big times. One certainly was NAFTA in the 1990s. The second Mexican time, as he calls it, was in the 2000s, when we actually got a change of the president with Fox. And Mexico showed that there could be democracy. And the first time with NAFTA, we actually looked for NAFTA. We went to the US and Canada looking for a free trade agreement. Mexico was very close, so it completely changed Mexico at the time. The third time, or the third Mexico time, was in 2013, when we got the energy reform and the telecommunications reform, thing that should have probably done during NAFTA, but we didn't negotiate it. It probably could have been much better, but it certainly was a big change. And the fourth Mexico time is nearshoring, that is happening now. And the big difference is we actually made those 3 changes within Mexico, and the fourth nearshoring, it's a circumstance that is happening for circumstances that are happening abroad. And Mexico is benefiting from that. And so Juan Francisco said a lot of things need to happen in Mexico to really take full advantage of what is happening, and you said it, Robert, we have changed from globalization to regionalization, and there are 3 big economic regions, which is Europe, Asia, and North America, and we're looking into it. NAFTA certainly is very important. USMCA was negotiated. It's a revamped NAFTA, not necessarily in the benefit of Mexico, to be honest with you. I think many things in USMCA were basically changes that didn't happen originally, because we didn't expect that many changes needed to be included. Environmental, employment, things that were not included, mechanisms for the resolution of disputes that actually seen happen, during the years. It was modified based on the experience. I think there are much more mechanisms that US and Canada have that could be applied against Mexico in case of a dispute. The fact that not many disputes have been brought against Mexico at this point in time, I think they are more political in nature than actually that they don't have a right to do it. And because elections are happening and because of immigration issues. Notwithstanding that fact, I think the fact that we have a USMCA is a huge factor for a lot of nearshoring, not only from the US, but from Asia and from Europe. A lot, especially from Asia, a lot of, especially Chinese companies are looking to relocate into Mexico because they know that this conflict between China and the US is not going to get any better, any sooner. So if they depend very much on the US market, they better, relocate into an area that has a trade agreement with the US. And we have seen a lot of demand for relocation, especially in the north part of Mexico. So there is an advantage, or there's an opportunity to capture that. It's not an easy, dealing with Asian companies relocating into Mexico, and especially from China, is not easy, and we probably will talk about later on. But it is a fact they are trying to take advantage of that opportunity to export.
No, it's interesting, and obviously, I would think that one of the reasons that the Chinese are coming in as much as they can is it's a way for them to skirt some of the tariff issues that they would have to handle if they were going to the U.S. So, what are the regions that are seeing you've talked about automotive and others. What are some of the regions that will benefit the most? I guess they're probably closest to the border, but where else do you see things, and how much work is needed in order to get other than the border regions to be able to benefit from nearshoring?
Thank you, Robert. So I would say, for obvious reasons, the northern part of Mexico has benefited the most. Not right now. If you go back 20 or 30 years ago to the Maquila first installation, or the decree that fostered Maquila companies, obviously the first Maquilas were located in the border region. In fact, you had what we referred then as twin plant operations, where you had sister companies or sister plants on both sides of the border, and you had things just moving around the border, where on the Mexican side, the reality at that time is that we had, in some cases, mere assembly processes. That has changed significantly, as I was explaining before, where mere assembly then suddenly changed to local manufacturing, bigger technology, and in some cases, research and development. So, for example, you have General Electric installed its biggest two hubs for research and development. One is in India, and the other one is in Querétaro, where you have more than 300 engineers every year that are trained for this purpose. So there's been a very dramatic change in how Mexico is seen as a place where this type of opportunities develop. In fact, there's some critical information, one of which that I find to be pretty rewarding, in the sense of the decision that Mexico made in the late 90s to say, well, early 90s, and then the rest of those decades ever since, was to become a manufacturing hub for many companies. So today, Mexico's manufacturing output and exports account for more than the rest of the Latin America and Caribbean combined. So we put out more exports than all of the other countries combined: Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, etc. You combine all of those, Mexico exports more than these guys. They're more focused on raw manufacturing and some other type of utility-based, commodities. That's what I wanted to say, commodities in those other regions. But going back to Robert's earlier question on Mexico. So again, if you look at the occupation rate of industrial parks in the northern part of Mexico, and I would say from the Bajío upwards, it's 100%. In some cases, it's over 100%. You would say it's impossible to be over 100%. It's over 100% because what they're doing now is that they're installing or opening plants near an industrial park, and they're trying to reach the industrial park one way or the other to benefit from the installation of the industrial park, because the industrial park has run out of space of where to install this facility. So there's clearly an indication that something is going well in the sense of occupation. However, if once you start looking at the other ifs that we included in the chart, then there's some questions as to how big of an opportunity onshoring, nearshoring is if we don't make those changes. I was looking today at, I still call it a tweet. I don't know if it's an X message or I don't know how it's called. I'll call it a tweet. The X-Files, yeah. So this comes from David Luno, who is a recognized economist. It says, Mexico's economy accounts for almost a quarter of Latin America and the Caribbean's combined GDP, and should be the prime destination for nearshoring. Yet, it managed to attract only 17% of the total foreign investment in the region last year. So there are signals that, yes, nearshoring is important for Mexico, but we're not doing the job. We were also looking at some information that shows us that some of the investment opportunities are not even coming to Latin America. There's a huge influx of investment, for example, to Vietnam. Vietnam is attracting a lot of the nearshoring. You would say it's not near. Well, it's nearshoring from the purpose or from the mindset of not being in China. There's still, of course, a transportation issue, but Vietnam is doing the homework. So the opportunity is here, and we need to move quickly. Last thing on Mexico. Luis de la Calle and others say that there's not one, two, perhaps there's three Mexicos: southern, central, and northern. The challenges are different. The infrastructure needs are different. The type of training, education, logistics, etc., it's all very different. And so I think the country has a lot of correct analysis of what needs to be done. Now the problem is, how quickly can we fix those things that are needed? For example, the one project that I think would have been important for this government, of all the 4 or 5 important projects, there's only one that makes sense, and that's the Trans-Isthmus channel, the land channel, where you would be able to ship things from the Pacific to the Atlantic and vice versa, facing real competition to Panama, which, by the way, Panama is stuck right now because of lack of water. So the opportunity is there to do that, but we're not investing at the right time and with the right speed. We built a lousy airport. We built a refinery that nobody will use. We're killing the eco-environment and ecosystems in the peninsula, and we purchased electricity that we already had in the grid. So bad decisions, bad results, but again, the opportunity to benefit from nearshoring is not going to close for at least 2 or 3 years. So we'll still be able to overcome these lousy mistakes.
Thank you, Juan Francisco. So what's interesting to me is in many ways a question of semantics. And this brings me to the question of the window of opportunity that we're talking about here. Both of you have mentioned. Some people are saying, look, the window is going to close in about 2 years. You're just going to have to do it all within the next 2 years, because after that, all of these industries will have become domiciled in Mexico, and then the rest of it is just organic growth. Whereas others, like Morgan Stanley, are saying nearshoring is going to continue to happen. There'll be new investment, and provided that the appropriate changes are made. So in some ways, I think it's going to be very hard to measure what exactly is nearshoring as we define it, and what is just the consequence of nearshoring, growth of local businesses, and so forth. How do you see that, Luis?
I don't think we can put a deadline on how soon it's going to close. I mean, what we have seen, or what the world has seen, is that Europe is much integrated within Europe, and they, consume within Europe much more that the North America does. The same happens within Asia. So when the borders close for some reason or for geopolitical reasons, they are much more integrated. It has not happened in North America, and when COVID came and geopolitical reasons and the war in Europe and the problems with China came, they realized that, and it is very clear, and they need to integrate. And one of the main reasons that in January the president from Canada and the United States came to Mexico is to find out how we can integrate more and to make sure that the conditions to integrate more are there. Companies in the US have a lot of pressure internally to make decisions for the future. They are long-term decisions on how to integrate and how to make sure how not to be dependable from Europe or Asia, and to have redundancies, as Juan Francisco mentioned it. And they look at many factors, of course. One of them is that they have the infrastructure, electricity, that they have rule of law, which is extremely important, that the administrative decisions when they make an investment will continue, or at least will be similar. And based on all those many factors, they will make a decision. I think a decision will not be made on the next 2 years. They will make the decision for a long-term investment. So I don't think the window of opportunity is going to close. What I think it will happen is if we don't, as a country, we don't make the right decisions, we are going to lose a lot of the opportunities that will happen to other countries, or even to the US. I mean, some of those decisions may happen in the US, and investment will be in the US, or they will not relocate from other places if they don't have the right conditions in Mexico that, we could take advantage, or they could take advantage of.
Thank you, Luis. So we have a room full of mostly lawyers here, which for some people might seem like a nightmare, but for us, it's exactly what we like. So I want to talk about, what does all this do for law firms, law practices? How do you get in on the nearshoring practice? What are the sorts of clients that one attracts? What are those kinds of skill sets that are needed? And I would say I would put this question to both of you, because both of you are heavily involved in this work. Both of you have very successful practices. It seems to me that for the legal industry, which after all, that's really the crux of this, the legal industry is going to benefit, and probably already is benefiting a great deal from nearshoring, and talk about nearshoring. And so I'd like to get a sense from each of you about, what does this do for the legal world in Mexico, and what are some of the challenges, and how are we going about it? You want to start, Juan Francisco?
Sure. I think one word may capture the essence of what Robert is asking, and I would call it global. So the ability to serve our clients and look at their needs is important from a local and a global perspective. So there are cultural clashes. I know we discussed during the preparation of this that, for example, what does China mean for Mexico? Is it a threat? Is it a competitor? What is China's role in all of this? And what we're seeing is that, China is not very happy about the idea that things are moving out of their country, but the reality is that some of those movements are being triggered by Chinese companies. So there's a huge influx of Chinese companies coming here. So two pieces of advice with Chinese companies is, try to make sure that if you have an office in China, make sure that your partners in that place of the world are in charge of collecting fees. It's impossible to collect fees from Chinese company. I can tell you that as a fact. So I only accept Chinese companies as clients if my colleagues in China say, don't worry, I will collect the fees. Otherwise, it's very difficult, practical advice. But it may sound, the cultural change for them is that they're giving you the opportunity to learn what they're doing, and you should be thankful for that opportunity, not actually expect to collect fees for your advice. As awkward as that may seem, that's the reality. But again, I think being able to provide this local approach is important. In other words, understanding what are the specific issues that are driving those companies to move into a different country and how you can provide value-added services for this purpose. There's a clear indication that Mexico is not alone, so there's huge competition, and part of that competition is driven by what law firms can do to host, attract, and promote that investment. So I have to be honest, I won't use this specific slide with my clients. I use it here because there's no way to prevent this from being used, but I will recognize with some of our clients, there's some hurdles, there's some obstacles, but guess what? We know the solution. We know how to overcome these issues, and we'll help avoiding learning curves. Other than that, I would say that we need to have a very open mind about where is investment needed. Anywhere in the country, different regions, different practices, different industries. The idea that we were merely just a hub for manufacturing has to be expanded into a completely different mindset. I think Mexico is poised for becoming one of the greatest countries really in 2050. I see Mexico in G10, for example. It's not a far-fetched idea if we do the right things. And I agree with Luis that it's impossible to say the window of opportunity will close exactly on December 31, whatever. But I also agree that unless we start moving in the right direction, we will make a huge mistake. Let me give you two comments. One is for the business community, and the other one is for the lawyers. For the business community, I cannot stand to see businessmen meeting with politicians and not openly saying, hey, I realize what you're telling me, but there's this issues that you need to deal with. And when they don't openly discuss the problems, they become part of the problem and not the solution. And the other thing I'd like to emphasize is that in a country with the social differences and the economic disparity as we have in Mexico, the fact that we don't move the country in that direction is a real threat to our well-being, is a real threat to the Mexico's ability to become that powerhouse that I'm referring to, but also it makes us bad citizens and bad, as somebody would say, bad hombres, of saying, why are we not using the opportunity to benefit those that are in dire need of education, of better jobs, of better opportunities? We need to look at this as a joint responsibility because it is within our control to make things happen. I would like to emphasize that.
Thank you very much. And Luis, I'd like to get your thoughts on that too, and also sort of what would you advise the audience here in terms of how do you get that business, and any other insights you have about what this does for the legal industry?
Thank you. No, I completely agree with Juan Francisco. I do believe we need to change our mindset, and when we are dealing with clients from Asia and from China, I believe we need to get into their shoes if we want to capture their business. It is difficult, and we need to prepare to, be open to negotiating different fee structures if you are willing to negotiate fee structures, and be careful with negotiating fees and make sure to do it, in a way that you will get paid. The other thing I think you need to prepare to do kind of a soft landing and hand-holding with clients, because most of those clients, if they come, they would like to hire you and then an employment lawyer in another firm and then a tax lawyer in another firm. They most likely, to have a firm that will help them through the whole process. And I think there will be a fierce competition in local firms that will try to focus on that. If you can have certainly, trade capabilities, employment capabilities, real estate capabilities, you will have a big advantage on the nearshoring, and probably I forgot to mention other areas, but you should focus on that. And they would be some places, El Bajío, Querétaro, of course, the northern part of Mexico, where, they will be focusing. I think local firms would have a big advantage, unless, those large firms or large corporations would come and probably they would like to use an international firm where, be prepared to offer that. But there will be a lot of competition and a lot of competition for fees that I would know. So we do need to change our mindset and be prepared to be aggressive. That's what I would see in the coming future.
And I think that's right. Being aggressive is always a good thing, and it's not something to be ashamed of by any means. And I think that in many legal cultures, that's kind of looked down on a little bit. But in fact, going after business and looking for business wherever you can find it and spotting opportunities like this is essential, I think, for Mexican firms and for Mexico as a whole, including the ambition, for example, which I think is very realistic, to be part of G10. One thing I would like to mention is that from everything that you two are saying, it's clear that this isn't just a question of cheap labor. I think we're well past that. When I was originally doing transactional work in Eastern Europe right after the Berlin Wall went down, a lot of Western companies were investing because of cheap labor. And then suddenly the cheap labor started to move from the Czech Republic to Hungary, and then to Romania, then to Ukraine, well, then to, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, and finally China. You are not in danger of that, but is there a danger that there'll be sort of a next nearshoring wave that leaves out or maybe minimizes the role of Mexico?
I think that I don't see it as a risk. I see it as an opportunity in the following way. I think in the next few years, what will happen is, if you look at North America and Central America, what will happen or should happen if things go in the right direction, the US will become more of an information-based economy. We will become a service-based economy, and manufacturing and other areas should move to Central America. That would be the most logical way in which everyone would benefit from having a next step in the direction of improving, again, capabilities, fitting from local cost structures, etc. So, for example, what I would see in Mexico happening in the next, say, 20 or 30 years, we should be a tourism powerhouse. We should become key for financial sectors, key for strategic investment in research and development, and move them more simple manufacturing down to Central America, where that type of work is direly needed. And have, this natural flow would make the entire region benefit. It would create political stability, it would create economic development, and it would create, again, stability that we all would benefit from, and create the need or the basis, again, for 2050 to put Mexico where it should belong. Now, this scenario that I've just described requires a lot of work, a lot of policy decisions, a lot of consistency in how to move in that direction. And I was going to say another very important thing, which is judicial scrutiny. One of the things that are most important in our daily practice is, regardless of what happens with bad decisions, we have judicial review, and we have a strong judicial ability to withstand or overcome bad decisions, particularly those, of course, that are illegal. So we need to make sure that the strength of our judiciary is there to prevent any further damage in the case of, again, things that are inconsistent with our constitutional standards or the like. So as long as we do that, I see a bright future, and I see, again, intelligence, artificial intelligence, all that, service and manufacturing. And eventually, this is not a complete division where there's no mix, of course. But if we move in that direction, Mexico has a bright future. I just see it, and I think it's completely within our reach.
I think that's a great answer, Juan Francisco. I do want to ask, because you mentioned judicial decisions, that every once in a while, rule of law comes up as a bit of an obstacle. And so Luis, just briefly, because I want to turn it over to questions and answers if we have questions from the audience, but just briefly, is rule of law an issue? I know you have a strong and capable judiciary, but is rule of law an issue that might scare away investment or make it difficult?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it is a big issue. We have known this administration that it changes decisions in every morning in the mañanera, and may make investments, long-term investments, fruitless from one day to another. So what many companies that they don't have just assembly in Mexico, not only maquiladora, that they can move from one day to another, but they are willing to invest for a long period of time in Mexico, and they really need to put brick, mortar, and long-term investment. Rule of law is fundamental. No question.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. I think that these were great. Let's turn it over to some questions. I see a question back there.
Thank you very much, brother. Let me just, it's more than a question. When I was listening right now to Juan Francisco and how he envisions the way that the productive chains should be evolving, and this role of Mexico, would like to add, I don't know if Adriana would like to help us, since, as you know, she's partner of BLP based in San Jose, Costa Rica. She's on our next panel. But how do you envision that from the Central American perspective, Adriana?
Yeah, I think, and hi everyone, thank you. I think we're very much in line with what you were saying. For sure, Mexico is one of the biggest players in the region, but Central America is betting on the fact of this nearshoring and friendshoring as an alternative. Just yesterday, our president met with President Biden, and after that, there was an announcement that in Costa Rica, Intel will be making a $1.2 billion investment in the next 2-3 years, which is amazing. 1,200 millones de dólares. I don't know if I translated that in English correctly. And then Google also announced that they will be partnering with El Salvador to make different projects there. And the thing about Costa Rica and why we're so attractive for purposes of bringing some talent like the one that you were discussing right now is because we have this free trade zone regime where, and that it's been growing for the past 5 years at a 20% rate. Probably that's something like what China was used to doing in many years. And it's amazing that's growing like that because you get a 0% tax incentive if you operate for foreign direct investment in the country for export only. So we are betting on some sort of manufacturing with some certain specific sectors. And that's something that's been growing. And we're also betting on more tourism in the coasts and trying to bring some of that growth into other areas of the country where what you were saying in terms of other types of manufacturing could find place or home in Costa Rica, where we do have the stability that many of the other countries in the region are lacking these days.
Thank you, Adriana. Other questions?
Thank you very much. I think Diana has, let me move. Juan Pablo, let me go with Diana, and then I'll go back with Juan Pablo. Sorry for this.
I have a question. I'm going to speak in Spanish para no asesinar el idioma de Shakespeare. Pero me ha gustado mucho la exposición, ha sido una delicia el panel y simplemente quiero decir, Juan Francisco, en los retos que tú presentaste extraordinariamente bien, yo creo que falta una pieza muy importante y es el sistema fiscal. Se asume que la mayoría del nearshoring, no sé, ustedes me dirán, es pregunta, llegará sobre todo en régimen de maquila. Y en México tuvimos una reforma muy importante hace 2 años donde desapareció el llamado Safe Harbor, en virtud del cual la empresa de maquila puede tener un APA, un Advanced Price Agreement de precios de transferencia. Y ahorita solo tienes una tasa fija, o sea, quedó el Safe Harbor y se eliminó el APA, que es de 6.5, 6.9. Además, yo he visto muchas maquiladoras que están en un estado de incertidumbre jurídica y no sé si debiera haber por parte del gobierno mexicano también un paquete que les diera una cierta seguridad en materia fiscal. Sería mi comentario.
Extraordinaria pregunta. No sé, Luis o Paco, ¿quién brinca?
For those people that don't know, Diana is one of the foremost tax experts in the country, so she really knows what she's talking about. I would like to say that one of the things that will need to happen in 2024, regardless of who wins, is that a deep tax reform needs to occur in Mexico. We cannot survive as a country with such low revenue and a low collection of taxes proportionately. We cannot live in a country where 60% of the economy is informal. We cannot live in a country where we are not providing the right set of incentives for this type of new investment. So I couldn't agree with you more, Diana. I think this requires a great revamp of our tax system, and hopefully you can help us design that new structure.
No, I agree with you. And one of the big issues for companies is the uncertainty with the application of the tax rules, and certainly with the tax authorities, the lack of criteria when they apply the tax rules, it's a problem. We need clarity of rules, and it goes again to the rule of law, where they don't have predictability on how it's going to be applied, or if they open an audit and it still opens, and it is a problem. We need better tax courts, better pro de con, better tax rules, without a question. That's something we need to work on as a country to have more investment and better investment in Mexico.
Thank you very much. I think the referee is looking at his watch a lot.
One more. We have Juan Pablo.
Thank you very much.
Juan Pablo Cervantes from Galicia on the back.
Thank you, Leopoldo, and congratulations on such an excellent forum. This question addressed to Francisco, but I think to the older members of the panel. You mentioned migration as one of the issues that we're facing right now, of course, and as well the lack of human resources for being able to address the opportunities that nearshoring is coming our way. How do you envision that we could use the many number of migrants that are in the north and central in order to incorporate it into the professional and labor-related aspects, and that might trigger as well nearshoring opportunities? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, thank you, Juan Pablo. I think we have the perfect situation where you have a human rights severe condition and yet an opportunity. I was in Tijuana about 1 month ago, and I was, gladfully able to talk to authorities and businessmen there, and they had initially a huge problem with massive influx of people coming from Brazil, from Haiti, and from Central America. And so the initial thing is, what do we do with these people? How do we feed them? Where do we, because they're not being able to cross into the US. And somebody said, why don't we employ them? There's huge maquiladora demand for people that can work, and these people are willing to work. So Tijuana has changed this from being a problem into a real opportunity. If Tijuana is doing this successfully, I should mention, without any real federal support, why don't we do this as a matter of a big policy throughout the country? Imagine for a second, I know the what if analysis doesn't work, but I'll do a what if in Jueves. Instead of having 40 people burning to death in one facility and putting them to work in a place, Jueves is one of the places where you have the highest rates of attrition because there's a huge demand and low supply of work. Why do we need to put people in jail if there's a place 1 mile away where they can actually pay taxes, make a good living, and integrate into the society? I think it's a complete mess, and yet it's within our reach. Again, Tijuana is proving to the entire country and to the world that it can be done in a successful manner. I think we should follow that example.
Thank you, Paco. I would just like share with you that Juan Pablo is not just a successful lawyer, but he's also, we have all the honor that he is the vice president of Appleseed Mexico right now, and he's chairing the Committee on Migration, which we foresee. Just let me give you something that we heard together with Maru a couple months ago from ACNUR, and they were telling us that Mexico will become, please correct me, I always mention third, would be the third country receiving migrants. More than migrants, it would be refugees. And the refugees, sorry, and what we're expecting is that we will have at least 250,000 refugees in Mexico this year. When we hear what's going on in Europe, we're not looking at what's happening here in Mexico. So unless we start changing, and that's something that Juan Pablo is working with an Appleseed and by himself as well, I think would be a huge problem. We should take advantage of all those workforce and their talent skills. Robert, I don't know, would like to do a closing argument?
Nothing to argue about here, really, with two very accomplished arguers by my side. But I just want to say that, first of all, I think we heard from two genuine experts on this very, very important subject, and I hope that it was instructive for everybody. And I hope that we're going to give my colleagues here a hand and thank them and thank you for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all, gentlemen. To balance it, next panel would be composed by two women. I think would be a very strong panel. Hope that you can join us. We'll have a small break of half an hour so you can do some networking, review email, call, and see you in half an hour. Thank you very much.